Welcome and thank you for joining us. Your support means the world. Quick question. Where are you listening from today? Which city? Which country? Drop it below. Now let's dive into today's story. The autumn breeze swept across the construction site as Matthew Sharp stood atop the skeletal framework of his latest project, a 15-story sustainable office complex that would redefine downtown Hartford skyline. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and sharp green eyes reflected the wisdom earned from 2 decades in structural engineering. His phone buzzed, interrupting his inspection of the steel beams. Another bank notification. $500 withdrawal to AEC Medical. Matthew's jaw tightened. The third such payment this month, following an identical pattern from the previous months. He pulled up the banking app, his calloused fingers navigating through their joint accounts history. "Mr. Sharp?" Dave Martinez's voice carried across the site. The foreman hurried over, his weathered face creased with concern. "We got an issue with the East Wing Foundation. The soil composition reports don't match what we're seeing." "Show me," Matthew said, pocketing his phone. The financial irregularities would have to wait. They walked through the controlled chaos of the construction site, workers nodding respectfully as they passed. Matthew had earned their loyalty through competence and fair treatment values his father had instilled in him from childhood. "See here?" Dave pointed to where the foundation met the soil. The engineering specs assumed clay-heavy soil, but were hitting limestone earlier than expected. Matthew crouched, running his hand along the rough surface. "Good catch, Dave. This could have caused settling issues down the line. Get me the original geological survey. We'll need to modify the foundation design." As they discussed solutions, Matthew's phone buzzed again. A text from Adriana, working late again. "Don't wait up. Regional restructuring meetings." His wife of 12 years, Adriana Charles, had been a pharmaceutical sales trainer for the past decade. Lately, her dark eyes, the same ones that had captivated him at that charity gala years ago, seemed to hold secrets behind their professional shine. Back in his site office, Sarah Chun, his assistant of 5 years, knocked on the door. "Your wife called earlier. She mentioned a training session in Hartford tonight." Matthew nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Thanks, Sarah. Any word from the permit office about the zoning variance?" "They approved it this morning. I've already forwarded the documentation to legal." After Sarah left, Matthew pulled up their joint account again. The AEC medical charges formed a pattern, always on Tuesdays, always $500. He opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting the anomalies. His father had taught him that problems, like buildings, needed solid documentation before you could solve them. That evening, in their colonial home, a property he'd renovated himself, Matthew prepared dinner. The kitchen gleamed with high-end appliances Adriana had insisted on during the remodel. The garage door hummed at 8:15 p.m. Adriana entered, her designer suit unwrinkled despite the long day, her dark hair falling in perfect waves. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The training session ran over. "I made salmon," Matthew said, placing their plates on the granite island. "How was Hartford?" "Productive," she replied, reaching for her wine glass. "We're implementing new sales protocols across the region." Matthew watched as she took a sip. "I noticed some unusual charges on our account. Several payments to AEC Medical." Adriana's response came too quickly, too smoothly. "Oh, those? They're for specialized vitamins and wellness treatments. Part of a new health regimen I'm trying. The company's wellness program partially reimburses them." As she spoke, her left hand moved to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd first noticed during their courthouse wedding, when she'd promised to be faithful. Over the years, he'd learned to recognize it as her tell. "Interesting," Matthew said, cutting his salmon. "The program sounds comprehensive." "It is." Adriana launched into a detailed explanation about holistic health approaches and preventive medicine. Each word felt rehearsed, like a sales pitch to a skeptical client. Later, loading the dishwasher, Matthew recalled Adriana's explanation. Something didn't add up. The timing of the charges didn't align with her usual schedule, and the company's wellness program had specific providers. He remembered reviewing their insurance documentation during enrollment. In their master bedroom, Adriana claimed exhaustion and turned away from him. Matthew lay awake, his mind working through the discrepancies like a complex structural problem. In construction, small irregularities often pointed to larger issues. The same principle he suspected applied to marriages. He thought about their life together, the vacations, the dinner parties with friends, the plans they'd made. Had it all been as carefully constructed as the explanation she'd given tonight? Matthew Sharp had built his career on attention to detail, and now those same instincts were telling him something was very wrong with the foundation of his marriage. Over the next 2 weeks, Matthew approached the mystery of his wife's behavior with the same methodical precision he applied to his engineering projects. He created a detailed spreadsheet, cross-referencing Adriana's claimed whereabouts against credit card statements and bank withdrawals. The yoga studio where she supposedly attended evening classes, Inner Peace Wellness on Maple Street, had closed 6 months ago. Matthew verified this personally, driving past the empty storefront during his lunch break. The space was being converted into a vape shop, construction permits clearly visible in the window. In his office, overlooking the Hartford skyline, Lamar Gray knocked on his open door. The senior project manager held 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Matthew. "Thanks," Matthew said, accepting the cup. "Been meaning to mention something," Lamar said, settling into a chair. "Saw your wife at Logan Airport last Tuesday, around 2 p.m. Thought it was odd since you mentioned she was in Hartford that day." Matthew's fingers stilled on his keyboard. "Logan Airport? You're sure?" "Definitely her. She was with some guy tall, looked like a Ken doll in a suit. They seemed familiar with each other." The description matched Calvin Campbell, one of Adriana's colleagues. Matthew had met him at company functions, always polished, always wearing that practiced pharmaceutical rep smile. "Must have been a last-minute change of plans," Matthew said smoothly. "Thanks for letting me know, Lamar." After his colleague left, Matthew pulled up their credit card statements. 3 separate charges at Tiny Treasures, an upscale children's boutique in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The most recent purchase was for $347.82. Children's clothes. They discussed having kids early in their marriage, but Adriana had always found reasons to wait. Too focused on her career, she'd said. Not ready for the responsibility. His phone rang. Ernest Pennington, his older brother and a real estate attorney who'd never quite warmed to Adriana. "Matt, got time for lunch? Need your eyes on a development proposal." At Morton's Steakhouse, their usual spot, Ernest noticed Matthew's distraction immediately. "You've got that look," he said, cutting into his ribeye. "The same one you had when you discovered that contractor was using substandard concrete on the Wilson project." Matthew considered his options. Ernest had always been direct, sometimes brutally so. "What's your experience with hidden assets and divorces?" Ernest's knife paused mid-cut. "Speaking hypothetically, for now." His brother's expression darkened. "More common than you'd think. Usually starts with unexplained expenses, irregular patterns. The smart ones plan it for months, sometimes years." "Why?" Matthew shared what he'd discovered: the medical charges, the children's boutique, the airport sighting. Ernest listened intently, occasionally making notes on his phone. "The inn in Boston," Ernest said finally. "The one she visits every 3rd weekend. Have you ever met her?" "No," Matthew realized. "There's always some reason why I can't come along. Aunt's migraines, scheduling conflicts." "Start documenting everything," Ernest advised. "And Matt? Remember when Dad insisted on keeping the house solely in your name? Said it was because he provided the down payment?" Matthew nodded. Their father, a retired construction foreman, had been adamant about it. "The old man's smarter than we gave him credit for," Ernest said. "That might turn out to be your saving grace." Back at the construction site, Matthew immersed himself in work. The sustainable office complex represented a $50 million investment. He couldn't allow personal issues to compromise its execution. Dave approached late in the afternoon. "Mr. Sharp, got a minute?" The crew's asking about the year-end bonus structure. As they discussed the details, Matthew noticed a familiar car pulling into the parking lot across the street. Adriana's silver Mercedes, distinctive with its custom wheels. She was supposed to be at a client meeting across town. Calvin Campbell approached her car, his expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair marking him as out of place among the construction equipment. Matthew watched their interaction, the casual familiarity, the way Calvin leaned into her window, their conversation lasting several minutes. That evening, Adriana mentioned nothing about meeting Calvin. Instead, she spun an elaborate tale about her client meeting, describing a conference room Matthew now knew she'd never seen. In bed that night, Matthew lay awake, pieces of the puzzle shifting into clearer focus. The Boston trips, the irregular expenses, the children's boutique charges, they were telling a story he couldn't ignore any longer. The migraine struck Matthew during a crucial site inspection of the East Wing Foundation. Fluorescent lights in the temporary site office sent shooting pains through his skull, making it difficult to focus on the structural integrity reports. "You look like hell, boss," Dave said, concern evident in his voice. "We can handle things here. Why don't you head home?" Matthew rarely left work early, but the throbbing behind his eyes had become unbearable. "Call me if anything comes up," he said, gathering his things. The drive home was a blur of pain and rising nausea. Adriana's silver Mercedes sat in their driveway, unusual for this time of day. She hadn't mentioned working from home. Matthew entered quietly, heading straight for the kitchen's medicine cabinet where they kept the prescription migraine medication. Adriana's voice drifted down from upstairs, sharp with irritation. "Mom, stop worrying. The timing is perfect. Matthew's almost done paying off the mortgage." He froze, hand on the cabinet door. "Once the house is free and clear, I'll file for divorce and claim domestic abuse. Kevin and I can finally be together with our secret kid." The bottle of painkillers slipped from his grasp, clattering against the stainless steel sink. Upstairs, Adriana continued unaware. "The documentation is bulletproof. I've had Robbie Durham and Vanessa witness our arguments." Matthew's always so focused on his precious buildings, he never noticed the groundwork I've been laying. Robbie Durham is friends since college. Vanessa Solomon, their neighbor, who'd helped Adriana organize their 10th anniversary party. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. Of course the abuse claims are fake, Mom, but it's not like he can prove they aren't. Courts always favor the mother, especially with Kevin's friend Terry Bishop handling the case. By this time next year, I'll have the house, half his savings, and alimony. He'll be too busy defending himself to figure out about Jamie. Jamie. The children's clothes suddenly made sense. While he'd been building sustainable office complexes, his wife had been constructing an elaborate trap, complete with a secret child. Footsteps moved toward the stairs. Matthew slipped out the back door silently, his migraine forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. In his car, he made 2 calls. First to Ernest. That theoretical question just became practical. "Need your help. All of it." Then to Sarah, "Clear my schedule for tomorrow. Family emergency." And Sarah, "Pull everything we have on Robbie Durham's consulting contracts with the firm. Every invoice, every site visit report." As he drove away from the house he'd renovated with his own hands, Matthew's thoughts were razor-sharp despite the migraine. Adriana had mistaken his focus for oblivion, his dedication for weakness. She'd forgotten or never understood that before you can build something strong, you need to understand exactly what you're dealing with. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Like any good engineer, he'd analyze the structural weaknesses, gather his data, and develop a comprehensive solution. Adriana thought she was laying groundwork. She was about to learn what that really meant from someone who did it professionally. And when the time came, he would take apart her carefully constructed plan with the same precision he used to design his buildings. Because while buildings could be rebuilt, trust once broken was like a compromised foundation. There was no fixing it. You could only tear it down and start over. The morning sun cast long shadows through Ernest Pennington's corner office as Matthew sat across from his brother, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and empty coffee cups. The leather chair creaked as he leaned forward, recounting yesterday's revelation for the 3rd time. "She was explicit about everything," Matthew said, his voice controlled despite the rage simmering beneath. "The fake abuse claims, the secret child, how she's been using our friends to build her case." Ernest removed his wire-rimmed glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The house is our starting point. It's solely in your name," Dad insisted when he helped with the down payment. "Remember that argument?" "Hard to forget," Matthew replied. "Adriana threw a fit, claimed I didn't trust her enough to add her name to the deed." Dad saw something in her we missed. Ernest pulled up property records on his dual monitors. Something predatory. Look at this, she's been researching property values, divorce attorneys. Timestamp shows searches going back 18 months. Matthew's phone buzzed. Adriana's face appeared on the screen. Working late tonight. Client presentation in Hartford. Hartford, Matthew scoffed. More likely Boston. Don't respond, Ernest advised, already dialing a number. Gail? Need your help on this one. Priority investigation. Gail Rangel's gravelly voice filled the speakerphone as Ernest outlined the situation. The private investigator had helped Ernest on numerous cases, known for finding evidence others missed. Give me 2 hours, Gail said. I've got contacts in Boston real estate. While they waited, Matthew paced the office, his engineering mind breaking down the problem into components. She mentioned someone named Kevin. Must be Calvin Campbell, works in her department. Tell me about him. Pharmaceutical rep, been with the company 5 years. Helped me build our deck 2 summers ago. Matthew's jaw tightened. Came to our anniversary dinner last year. Gave this big toast about enduring love. Ernest made notes, his legal pad filling with names and connections. We'll need everything on Campbell. Employment records, travel patterns, financial statements. Gail called back sooner than expected. Got something interesting. Address in Back Bay. Registered to Mari Mooney. That name mean anything. Adriana's cousin, Matthew confirmed. The sick aunt she visits. Well, cousin Mari's got a 3-year-old boy enrolled at Little Scholars Preschool. James Mooney, Jamie, for short. Kids' records list an emergency contact. Calvin Campbell. The revelation hung in the air. 3 years. They'd been hiding this child for 3 years. There's more, Gail continued. Apartments paid for through a shell company. Traces back to a joint account between Mooney and Campbell. Ernest scribbled furiously. We need surveillance on that location. Photos, visitor logs, everything. Already on it, Gail replied. Got people watching the school too. Discreet professional. They worked through lunch, picking at sandwiches Ernest's assistant brought in. Bank statements revealed a pattern of transfers, each just under reporting thresholds. Property records showed Mari Mooney's apartment purchased through a complex series of transactions. Look at this, Ernest pointed to a sequence of payments. Medical expenses, wellness treatments, all to companies that barely exist. She's been siphoning money for years. Using our joint accounts, Matthew noted. But it's my income she's stealing, which gives us grounds for criminal charges. Ernest smiled grimly. Fraud, misappropriation of funds. By evening, they had outlined their initial strategy. Ernest called in favors from colleagues, setting up meetings with specialists in divorce law and financial crimes. One more thing, Ernest said as Matthew prepared to leave. We document everything from now on, every lie, every missing dollar, every false allegation. Build our case while she thinks she's building hers. Matthew nodded, his expression hardened by betrayal. She won't see it coming. That's exactly right, Ernest replied. Let her think her plan is perfect. Meanwhile, we'll be constructing something much stronger. The extent of betrayal unfolded over the next days like a cancer revealed in stages. Robbie Durham's involvement cut deep. Matthew's friends since their MIT days had been methodically documenting their interactions, twisting reality into a narrative of abuse. Look at these photos. Gail spread surveillance images across the conference table. Durham's been following you for months. Every gesture, every conversation, all captured and distorted. Matthew examined the evidence. A friendly clap on the shoulder at a barbecue, photographed to look threatening. An animated discussion about the Patriots game, framed to suggest aggression. Found his connection, Gail continued. Durham's firm does consulting work for Campbell's department. Been on their payroll for 2 years. Ernest made notes building their case. Any other witnesses they've lined up? Vanessa Solomon. Gail pulled out more files. Your neighbor? She's notarized statements about witnessing disturbing patterns of behavior. Vanessa. Matthew's voice was cold. We had dinner with her and her husband last month. She borrowed my tools to fix her deck last summer. She's done this before, Gail revealed. Found 3 other divorce cases where she acted as a witness. Always the same pattern abuse allegations. Always supporting the wife. But Calvin Campbell emerged as the architect of betrayal. Surveillance photos showed him with Adriana and Jamie at parks, restaurants, shopping centers. A perfect family tableau, built on lies. Campbell's careful, Gail reported. But he's getting sloppy. Confidence makes people careless. The investigation revealed Campbell's methodical construction of a parallel life. The Boston apartment wasn't just a meeting place, it was a fully furnished family home, complete with Jamie's room and family photos. Joint accounts, Gail outlined. Trust fund for Jamie. Private school applications listing Campbell as the father. They've created an entire shadow existence. Matthew studied a photo of Jamie at a playground, Calvin pushing him on a swing while Adriana watched. The boy had Calvin's features, the same nose, the same smile. The affair started within months of Campbell joining the company. Gail continued. 5 years of deception, planned and executed with precision. But they're making mistakes now, getting comfortable. Ernest arranged a meeting with Jordan Acevedo, a forensic accountant renowned for unraveling complex financial fraud. We need everything, Ernest told Jordan. Every dollar they've moved, every account they've touched. The web of betrayal extended beyond family and friends. Colleagues at Matthew's firm had been enlisted to support Adriana's narrative. The foundation of his life had been corrupted, piece by piece. She's isolated you systematically, Ernest observed. Turned your social circle into witnesses against you. It's tactical, making you look unstable, aggressive. Matthew's response carried the cold precision of his engineering mind. Then we'll build a new foundation, one that buries them all. Jordan Acevedo's office resembled a command center, monitors displaying financial records and transaction patterns. The forensic accountant had worked through 3 nights, tracing money movements with obsessive detail. Nearly $200,000 diverted to Boston, Jordan explained, highlighting transactions on his main screen. Structured to avoid detection, medical expenses, wellness treatments, investment accounts. All eventually flowing to shared accounts with Campbell or Mari Mooney. Matthew studied the patterns, his engineering mind recognizing the systematic approach. Show me the timeline. Started small, Jordan pulled up a chronological display. Test transfers building confidence. Then larger movements disguised as legitimate expenses. Classic fraud pattern, but executed with unusual patience. Ernest arrived with fresh coffee and more files. They got greedy, though. Made mistakes. Significant ones, Jordan agreed. The transfers to Mari's accounts created clear patterns. Regular withdrawals, predictable timing. They thought they were being clever, but they built a trackable system. Matthew stood at the window, watching construction cranes move against the skyline. What's our next move? Ernest laid out documents on Jordan's conference table. First, we protect your assets. The house will transfer it to me for nominal consideration. $1 makes it legally binding. She'll challenge it, Matthew said. Let her try. Ernest's smile was predatory. The transfer will be bulletproof. Meanwhile, we move your personal savings to new accounts. Dad's insistence on separate finances? Turns out he was protecting you all along. Jordan interrupted, pointing to his screen. Found something in Campbell's records. His expense reports don't match his actual movements. He's been falsifying corporate documents to cover his Boston trips. Matthew turned from the window. Can we prove it? Better. Jordan's expression was grim satisfaction. We can show systematic fraud extending beyond your situation. Sales figures, expense accounts, client reports, all manipulated. He's been defrauding his company while helping Adriana defraud you. The counterstrike took shape over the next hours. Matthew transferred his personal savings to new banks, accounts opened under Ernest's guidance. The house transfer was prepared with meticulous documentation. Sign here. Ernest pushed the papers across the desk. $1 consideration. Legally solid, morally justified. Matthew's signature was steady, his resolve hardened by betrayal. What about Campbell's employer? Anonymous tip, Ernest suggested, with comprehensive evidence of falsified reports. Let their internal audit team take him apart. They worked past midnight, building their response to years of deception. Each betrayal would be answered, each conspirator exposed. Matthew thought of Adriana's smug confidence, her certainty that he was too absorbed in work to see her machinations. One final consideration, Ernest said as they finished. When this falls apart, she'll play victim. claim you're retaliating, trying to silence her. Matthew's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. Let her try. I've got something she doesn't. What's that? Truth, Matthew said simply. And I'm going to use it to destroy everything she's built. The pieces were set. Like the complex structures he engineered, Matthew had analyzed the weaknesses in Adriana's scheme and designed something stronger. Now it was time to watch her house of cards collapse under its own weight. The afternoon sun filtered through the glass walls of Pharmacor's executive conference room as Calvin Campbell faced the internal audit committee. His normally immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his Hermes tie slightly askew, a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. Sarah Chun, Matthew's former assistant and newly appointed head of the audit committee, spread documents across the mahogany table. Her promotion 6 months ago had puzzled many. Now her purpose became clear. Mr. Campbell, Sarah's voice carried the quiet authority she'd learned from Matthew. These expense reports from your Hartford territory show significant discrepancies. Would you care to explain? Calvin adjusted his tie, a recent gift from Adriana. As I've stated, these numbers reflect standard industry practices and standard practices? Sarah pulled up a projected spreadsheet. Like claiming client meetings in Hartford while your credit card shows dinner at L'Espalier in Boston? Or perhaps you'd like to explain how your reported sales figures exceed total market capacity by 40%. The conference room door opened. Thomas Blackwood, regional director, entered flanked by HR representatives and the company's legal counsel. That's enough, Campbell. Thomas's deep voice filled the room. We've reviewed everything. The falsified reports, the inflated numbers, the creative accounting spanning 5 years. You're terminated, effective immediately. You can't do this. Calvin stood, his practice charm cracking. I'm the top performer in the Northeast region. A performance built on fraud. Thomas cut him off. Security will escort you out. And Calvin? The SEC is particularly interested in those sales figures, as is the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. As security let him out, Calvin caught glimpses of familiar faces. Colleagues who'd envied his success now watched his downfall with barely concealed satisfaction. His secretary packed his personal items into a box, carefully removing company property. Your company car keys, the security guard held out his hand, and your building access card. Standing in the parking lot, Calvin pulled out his phone to call Adriana. Straight to voicemail. He tried their private messaging app. His access had been revoked. The carefully constructed parallel life they'd built was unraveling thread by thread. Across town, Adriana Charles entered her immaculate colonial home, her Prada heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The house felt different, emptier somehow. Matthew's absence, usually a relief, now felt ominous. The envelope on the kitchen table caught her eye. Thick, legal-sized, bearing Ernest Pennington's law firm letterhead. Her manicured hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Divorce papers lay inside, but they weren't alone. Photos of her and Calvin in Boston. School records for Jamie. Bank transfer documentation. Witness statements that contradicted her carefully crafted narrative. No, she whispered, her composure cracking as she flipped through the stack. This isn't possible. The final document froze her in place. The house deed, showing Ernest's ownership. Everything she'd planned, every careful step over years of deception, lay exposed and neutralized. Looking for something? Matthew's voice came from the doorway. He stood there, his frame filling the space, radiating a quiet power she'd never fully appreciated before. Matt, please. I can explain everything, she began, reaching for the script that had served her so well. Save your performances for someone who still believes them. He cut her off. Though you might want to find a new audience. Terry Bishop's facing an ethics investigation for agreeing to file false abuse claims. You can't prove anything, she snapped, her mask slipping to reveal the calculating woman beneath. The courts always side with the mother. Matthew's laugh held no warmth. Interesting strategy, considering you've hidden your child for 3 years. How is Jamie enjoying Little Scholars Preschool, by the way? Still finger painting on Thursdays? The color drained from Adriana's face. How could you possibly? No. I know everything, Adriana. Every lie. Every stolen dollar. every false statement Robbie and Vanessa prepared. It's all documented, verified, and in the hands of people who know exactly what to do with it. Those are lies, she snarled, desperation replacing composure. Robbie and Vanessa saw how you treated me. They witnessed your carefully staged performances? Matthew smiled, the expression reminiscent of a wolf. You might want to check on your co-conspirators. They're rather preoccupied with their own legal troubles at the moment. Adriana lunged for the papers, but Matthew's reflexes were faster. He gathered them smoothly into his briefcase. Ernest's office will be in touch, he said, moving toward the door. Oh, and you might want to call Calvin. He's having quite an interesting afternoon. Where are you going? Her voice rose, shrill with panic. Matthew paused, looking back at the woman he'd once believed in. To build something new, something authentic. You've taught me an invaluable lesson about foundations, after all. Left alone in the kitchen, Adriana's phone exploded with notifications. Messages about Calvin's termination, the SEC investigation, friends and colleagues suddenly unreachable. Her perfectly constructed life was collapsing, and for the first time in years, she had no prepared script to follow. Hartford County Courthouse hummed with anticipation as Matthew's civil suit against Adriana for fraud and misappropriation of funds began. Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her zero tolerance of ethical violations and her background in financial crimes prosecution, presided over the case that had captured the legal community's attention. Your Honor, Ernest stood, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of practice. The evidence will show not only the systematic theft of nearly $200,000 through fraudulent medical charges, but a calculated attempt to abuse domestic violence laws for financial gain. My brother's wife didn't just commit fraud, she attempted to weaponize the very systems designed to protect actual victims. The courtroom fell silent as financial records filled the display screens. Jordan Acevedo took the stand, his forensic analysis revealing years of systematic theft. The patterns are unmistakable, Jordan explained, highlighting transaction sequences. Each transfer carefully structured to avoid detection, but creating a clear picture of premeditated fraud when viewed as a whole. Adriana sat with her new attorney, a last-minute replacement for Terry Bishop. Her usual poise had crumbled, replaced by barely contained fury. Bishop himself faced an ethics investigation for his role in preparing false abuse claims. The dominoes continued to fall. Robbie Durham's wife received an anonymous package containing proof of his false statements, along with evidence of his affair with a legal assistant. The divorce papers were filed before sundown. Vanessa Solomon's accounting firm discovered her history of notarizing false documents. Her professional license suspended, she faced potential criminal charges for multiple counts of fraud. The court finds the evidence of fraud overwhelming, Judge Martinez declared. The defendant will repay all misappropriated funds plus penalties. Furthermore, given the egregious attempt to abuse domestic violence statutes, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Matthew watched from his seat as Adriana's mask finally shattered completely. This is all lies, she screamed, rising from her chair. He's the abusive one. Ask anyone. They all saw. Miss Charles, Judge Martinez's voice cut like steel. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Your attempts to manipulate the court system have failed. Be grateful I'm not ordering jail time yet. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, drawn by the case that had exposed systematic abuse of domestic violence laws. Matthew walked past them, ignoring questions about the scandal that had rocked the local legal and pharmaceutical communities. Ernest joined him at the car. The State Bar Association's investigating Terry Bishop. His license will likely be suspended for knowingly preparing false abuse claims. Good, Matthew replied. Actions have consequences. That evening, Matthew reviewed the aftermath. Robbie Durham, exposed and divorced, had fled to Arizona. Vanessa Solomon's reputation lay in ruins, her notary fraud exposed across multiple cases. Calvin Campbell faced SEC investigations and potential criminal charges for securities fraud. The truth had cascaded through their carefully constructed lies, leaving nothing but consequences in its wake. The conspirators who'd thought themselves clever found their schemes exposed to harsh light, their carefully built deceptions crumbling like sand castles before a rising tide. 6 months later, Matthew stood in his new Denver office, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically through floor-to-ceiling windows. His engineering consulting firm, specializing in sustainable urban development, had quickly established itself as an industry leader. The Richardson project specifications are ready for review, Carol, his new assistant, announced, placing files on his desk. And the mayor's office called about the downtown renewal proposal. "Thanks, Carol," Matthew replied, turning from the window. The betrayal had taught him valuable lessons about trust, but hadn't broken him. Instead, it had focused his natural strength and precision into something even more powerful. In Connecticut, Ernest had transformed the colonial house into a high-end rental property. All income went to a foundation supporting actual domestic violence victims, a fitting response to Adriana's attempted exploitation of the system. The foundation's first shelter opens next month, Ernest reported during their weekly call. "We're already at capacity with a waiting list." Adriana's attempt to abuse the system ended up helping real victims. Fitting, isn't it? News filtered through about the others. Calvin's wife, upon learning about Jamie's existence, had filed for divorce. The custody battle that followed exposed even more of his fraudulent behavior, leading to additional SEC investigations. Adriana had lost everything: her job, her reputation, her plotting partners. Last Ernest heard, she was working as a retail clerk in New Hampshire, her dreams of a fraudulent windfall shattered against the reality of consequences. Matthew's final act wasn't about revenge, but justice. He established a scholarship fund for engineering students, named after his father, whose wisdom had protected him from financial ruin. The first recipient was a young woman whose mother had escaped actual domestic abuse. "Dad would be proud," Ernest said during another call. "You took something ugly and built something meaningful from it." Standing at his window, reviewing plans for a new project, Matthew reflected that, like the buildings he engineered, life needed both a strong foundation and the flexibility to withstand unexpected forces. He had rebuilt his life on stronger ground, while those who tried to destroy him had lost everything they'd schemed to gain. The Rocky Mountains stood eternal before him, a reminder that the strongest structures were those built on truth. He'd lost a false marriage, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that he could weather any storm and emerge stronger. His phone buzzed. Another major contract awarded, another opportunity to build something lasting. Matthew smiled. The future stretched before him, solid and true, built on foundations that would endure. The betrayal had taught him that sometimes the most important structures weren't built of steel and concrete, but of truth and justice. Those who tried to destroy him had instead made him stronger, their attempts at destruction becoming the foundation for something far more meaningful than they could have imagined. As the sun set behind the Rockies, Matthew reviewed plans for his next project. He'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but creation, building something positive from the ashes of betrayal. While his enemies had lost everything in their pursuit of dishonest gain, he had gained everything by standing firm in truth. The end wasn't about victory or vengeance, but about justice and renewal. Matthew had emerged not just successful, but stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to build things that would last both in steel and in life. Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the Denver skyline as Matthew Sharp reviewed the final plans for his company's latest project, a revolutionary carbon-neutral residential complex spanning 10 city blocks. At 52, his success in sustainable urban development had earned him international recognition. His phone buzzed. Ernest's annual update. "You won't believe who I saw today," Ernest said without preamble. "Adriana." Matthew leaned back in his chair, curiosity rather than pain coloring his response. How the mighty have fallen. Working at a convenience store in Manchester, living in a studio apartment above it. The years haven't been kind. Ernest paused. "She tried asking about you. And I told her you were too busy revolutionizing sustainable architecture to remember her name." The brothers shared a laugh. A decade had transformed the betrayal into something distant, more like a cautionary tale than a personal wound. Calvin Campbell's fate had been even more dramatic. After serving 3 years for financial fraud, he'd emerged to find every door in the pharmaceutical industry closed. His attempt to reconcile with his ex-wife had failed spectacularly, especially after she'd won full custody of their children. Campbell's working as a used car salesman in New Jersey, Ernest continued. Apparently, he tried getting back into sales, but his SEC violations follow him everywhere. Jamie won't even see him anymore. Jamie, now 13, had grown into a talented athlete under his mother's care. Calvin's attempts to maintain a relationship had been undermined by his own narcissism and inability to put his son's needs first. "How's the foundation doing?" Matthew asked, changing the subject to something more meaningful. The foundation, created from the Colonial House's rental income, had expanded beyond their wildest expectations. Now operating 3 shelters across Connecticut, it had helped hundreds of domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. The annual fundraiser exceeded goals again, Ernest reported. "Remember Vanessa Solomon? Her daughter volunteers there now, some kind of redemption for her mother's actions." Vanessa had never recovered professionally from the notary fraud scandal. Her marriage had collapsed under the weight of public shame, but her daughter had emerged stronger, determined to make amends for her mother's crimes. Robbie Durham's story had taken an unexpected turn. After his divorce and public disgrace, he'd undergone a genuine transformation. Now running a small construction company in Arizona, he'd sent Matthew a long letter of apology 5 years ago. Matthew had never responded, but he'd heard through industry contacts that Durham had become an advocate for ethical business practices. "The scholarship program's expanding," Matthew shared. Last year's recipient was actually Terry Bishop's niece, ironic considering her uncle's role in the original scheme. Bishop himself had been disbarred, his legal career ended by the ethics violations stemming from his planned abuse allegations. Matthew's own life had evolved in unexpected ways. His company led the field in sustainable urban development, with offices in 3 countries. The lessons learned from betrayal had made him a better judge of character. His current team was built on a foundation of absolute trust and integrity. "Sarah Chin's running our Asian operations now," he told Ernest. "Remember my former assistant who helped expose Campbell? She's transformed our presence in the Singapore market." The conversation turned to family matters. Ernest's daughter had just made partner at his firm, carrying on the family's legal legacy. Their father, whose wisdom had protected Matthew's assets, had passed away 5 years ago, but his influence lived on through the scholarship foundation bearing his name. "Dad always said the truth finds its way to the surface," Ernest mused. "Like water coming up through concrete." After hanging up, Matthew walked to his office window. Denver had changed in the decades since he'd arrived, and he'd helped shape that change. His projects emphasized not just sustainability, but community-building spaces that fostered connection and trust. The irony wasn't lost on him. Adriana's betrayal, meant to destroy him, had instead catalyzed his greatest achievements. While she struggled to survive on minimum wage, her dreams of wealth shattered, he'd built something lasting and meaningful. Calvin's son Jamie had recently applied for an engineering internship at Matthew's firm, unaware of the connection. Matthew had recused himself from the decision, but smiled when he heard the boy had earned the position on merit alone. Sometimes justice worked in subtle ways. The Foundation's latest initiative focused on preventive education, teaching young professionals to recognize and respond to financial abuse. Matthew occasionally spoke at these sessions, turning his experience into a tool for helping others. "Mr. Sharp?" Carol, still his assistant after all these years, appeared at the door. "The mayor's here for the Riverside Development meeting." Matthew gathered his papers, pausing to straighten a framed photo on his wall, the first Foundation Shelter's opening ceremony. The plaque beneath it read, "From betrayal, we build strength. From deception, we forge truth." 10 years had transformed not just buildings, but lives. Those who'd chosen deception had reaped its bitter harvest, while those who'd stood for truth had built something enduring. As Matthew headed to his meeting, he reflected that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but creation. He'd taken the broken pieces of betrayal and built a legacy of truth. helping others while his betrayers faded into cautionary tales. The story had ended not with a bang, but with justice quiet, relentless, and complete. Like the buildings he created, the truth had proved stronger than any deception, standing firm long after the lies had crumbled to dust. Time for the next project, he murmured, stepping into the conference room where the future waited to be built. The end wasn't really an end at all, but a continuation of building, of growing, of transforming pain into purpose. While his betrayers remained trapped in the consequences of their choices, Matthew had built a life as solid as the foundations he laid, as true as the principles he lived by. The sun set behind the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of triumph. Another day of building something true, something lasting. Another day of proving that the best response to betrayal isn't bitterness, but building something better than what was lost. That perhaps was the greatest victory of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.